we decided to focus on one aspect only in our submission, which was brakes, because for us, this is the number one issue that our workers face, in particular in the fast food industry. Getting brakes, including at a reasonable time in the course of the day, is one of the biggest problems, has been one of the biggest problems in the fast food industry. The requirement for brakes, which has always existed in our contracts and previously in individual employment, in the collective agreements we have with the fast food companies, and prior to that in their individual employment agreements, were routinely ignored. And often, even with the law change, that remained true. This problem is simply a problem that arises because wages or labour hours are a key part of the cost of this industry, so they seek to minimise the allocation of labour to just the minimum that's required to run the shift, and often that's disrupted either by changes in store, changes in store customer patterns, or people being sick, or something that's unforeseen, and it demands all hands on deck. People can't get their breaks. Also, workers are usually reluctant to let their workmates down. It's a difficult situation, and when it's still busy, when you're short-staffed, when people are away, everyone pulls together. But I think the employers have taken advantage of that goodwill unfairly. We also have an industry where there's a large number of migrant workers who are reluctant to assert their rights because they are hoping to pursue additional work or residence visas and so on. We had one situation with a KFC up north where half the staff were Indian, and the Indians thought the brakes didn't actually apply to them. Only sort of Kiwi workers. That was their belief. That's how they explained in the company investigation. That's how they explained their view, which had developed over time. We use this, and there's really in any of the agreements, except for one now, is there any clause that gives compensation when you miss your break? If you work through it, work through the 15-minute, or even miss your meal break and work through the time that would have been your meal break. There's only one agreement with McDonald's that has some form of compensation for the 15-minute break only, missing the 15-minute break. We also represent workers in the security industry, in the hotel industry, and these industries are all marked by what in the UK are being called zero-hour contracts. That is, you are not guaranteed any hours from week to week. So even in the collective agreements that we have, there's no guarantee for any worker who's a wage worker in those industries that you have a guaranteed number of hours. You're rostered week to week, your roster changes week to week, and we have some clauses that try to promote fairness and so on and so forth in the contracts, but there's no guaranteed hours unless you're on salaried staff. This gives enormous power to often very young managers who can use, whether you're rostered 10 hours this week, 20 hours next week, 30 hours next week, or back to 10, enormous power to punish and reward. Punish those who they see as not being team players, and that might include and does include those who are having breaks when they need them or want them, or even bypassing disciplinary other processes if you're a little bit late, or you've given the manager a bit of lip, then your hours go down the following week. Very, very hard to control and to push back against that type of power that these managers have. Now, everyone says breaks are important, health and safety. The company head offices generally will say that they agree that people should have breaks, and that they tell their managers just to make sure that this happens. The difference is I've never ever seen, and we represent all our managers too actually, never ever seen anyone disciplined for not giving their workers breaks. Even disciplined for not following procedure, cash handling procedures, disciplined for doing this, disciplined for doing that, disciplined for food hygiene. Never ever seen a manager disciplined for not giving their workers breaks. So there's a different rules apply to different rule breaking in the industry. Now, fundamentally, it comes down to the sort of inequality in power, which is the premise of the Act, and how do we address that. Now, as I said, to be honest, it's been, even with these contractual requirements, it's been difficult for us to enforce. We will get calls simply daily that, I'm not getting the breaks, not getting this, not getting that. Breaks. The other one is, of course, the chopping around of people's hours. So those are the two big issues that we're trying to address in the industry through collective agreements. The law change was significant. Although we had the breaks in the contracts, the fact that it became law allowed us to do two things. One, workers felt more confident, say, put my hand up, it's the law, leave a break, it's the law, not just as the contract, which they may or may not see. We have 100% turnover in this industry every year. So people, if they get the contract, whatever, it's understanding your rights and asserting your rights is very difficult. Under the old contracts, you didn't get a meal break unless you worked 5 hours, and before the law changed, you didn't get a meal break unless you worked 5 hours, and you didn't get a second rest break or smoker break unless you worked 8 hours. And they were strict on that. Right? They would roster you 7.5, 7 3/4, 7 hours 50, but even had cases of being rostered 7 hours 59 minutes in order to avoid the entitlement to a second. And under the old contracts, our contracts actually, they're all 15-minute breaks rather than 10-minute breaks. It was a significant improvement we were able to do through the collective agreement process to raise that rest break. But still, it was, before the law change, it was sort of 5 hours before you got a meal break, and 8 hours, very strict around that 8 hours before you got a second rest break. Now, because of the law change, we've been able to incorporate meal breaks after the 4 hours and rest breaks after a second rest break after the 6 hours, which is important. We have that in the contracts, that's true, so going forward, that's a consequence of the law change, but I think removing that sort of, that legal entitlement will make it again harder to enforce, increase that challenge to enforce. Even following the law change, we have situations where they'd often be rostering people the 4 hours or the 6 hours to avoid either the meal or the second break entitlement. But then you work through those, because the shift's short or whatever, so you work longer than the 4 hours or longer than the 6 hours, and usually you never got the meal break. Because it hadn't been rostered at the beginning of the day, it wasn't part of the manager's calculations, so they couldn't incorporate it into working beyond 4 hours. Now, we're not worried about working a few minutes beyond 4 hours and so on, but we've done a calculation because McDonald's, and we're doing a court case around this year, McDonald's clocks in and clocks out for the lunch break, that on average, 100 times a month per store, people were being rostered for 4 hours and worked beyond that. Now, sometimes it was only 5 or 10 minutes, but often it was 1 or 2 hours beyond 4 hours without getting their meal break entitlement. Now, we're going to argue that in court, but that's the sort of situation that thousands, actually tens of thousands, probably I think throughout many industries, hundreds of thousands actually face. So we are strongly against the change in relationship to the rest breaks. We don't actually see why it's necessary. I've seen a few arguments around air traffic control things and so on, but I've never actually seen a serious argument why we can't retain the legal obligation to provide a rest and a meal break in the law. I think flexibility is one thing, but when the flexibility means you routinely miss out on a basic right, which is what did exist in this industry, then it's a bad picture.
Thank you, Mark. Chris, thank you. Thank you very much.